Hello, 7th graders, we're back, and today we're reading about improved technology, 25.3, so take out your reading and follow along. By the 1860s, many of the factories necessary for rapid industrialization of the United States were already in place. Machines had taken over much of the work once done by hand. Work had moved from homes to factories. Railroads had begun to connect customers and manufacturers with an efficient transportation system. After the Civil War, new inventions and improved technology prompted the growth of new industries. Some of these innovations or new ideas helped businesses to grow and become more efficient. Others made daily life easier for many Americans. Steel. Before the Civil War, the nation's railroad ran on iron rails that wore out quickly. Railroad owners knew that rails made of steel, a mixture of iron, carbon, and sometimes other metals, were stronger and would last longer. Steel, however, was difficult and costly to make. In 1872, a Scottish immigrant named Andrew Carnegie went to England to study a less expensive method of making steel, a method invented by Henry Bessemer. Carnegie owned a company that made iron bridges for railroads. He knew that these bridges would be better if they were made of steel. Carnegie was so impressed by Bessemer's process that he brought it back to the United States. "The day of iron has passed," he said. "Steel is king." Carnegie was right. Within a decade, steel was replacing iron in rails, locomotives, and bridges. Other industries took advantage of steel, which was less expensive than iron. Steel nails, needles, and knives became common household items. Many steel companies competed fiercely to supply steel for such products. To remain the leader, Carnegie hired scientists to improve the quality of the company's steel. He employed good managers to make his steel mill run efficiently. His recipe for success was adopt every improvement, have the best machinery, and know the most. To keep the costs low, Carnegie set out to control every step of the steelmaking process. He purchased iron mines to supply his ore, coal fields to fire his furnaces, and railroads to ship his finished steel to customers. To reduce his competition, Carnegie also bought up several rival steel companies. He then combined them all from the giant Carnegie Steel Company to form the Carnegie Steel Company. By 1900, Carnegie Steel produced a quarter of the nation's steel. Electric power, phonograph, and more. In 1876, Thomas Edison opened an invention factory in New Jersey. With a team of workers, he set out to create a minor invention every 10 days and a major one every 6 months or so. Edison succeeded brilliantly. More than any other inventor, he helped turn electricity into an everyday source of light and power. His workshop turned out the first practical light bulb, the phonograph, or record player, the motion picture projector, and many other inventions. In 1882, Edison built the first electric power station and distribution system in New York City. His team invented everything the system required, including generators, regulators, meters, switches, lights, light sockets, fuse boxes, and underground electric cables. When he finally turned the generator on, electricity began to flow to homes, stores, and factories. The age of electricity had begun. By 1900, some 25 million light bulbs were glowing across the country. Many factories were replacing water wheels and steam engines with electric motors. Streetcars powered by electricity carried workers and shoppers along city streets. New electric-powered devices such as washing machines and vacuum cleaners were making working easier. The telephone. The telephone was invented by a Scottish immigrant, Alexander Graham Bell. In 1876, he was getting ready to test his talking machine. Bell spilled acid on himself. "Watson, come here, I want to see you," he commanded with assistance. Thomas Watson, who was in the other room, heard every word over Bell's telephone. Bell's invention worked so well that by 1915, Americans were communicating with one another over 9 million telephones. All these telephones made American industry more efficient and competitive by allowing producers, sellers, and customers to communicate quickly and easily. Interchangeable parts. New methods of organizing work were also making businesses more efficient. Factory owners used Eli Whitney's idea of making a lot of different products with interchangeable parts. Interchangeable parts are parts that can be replaced or swapped out, like how you can change laces on a pair of athletic shoes. They also used the assembly line. In a shoe factory, for instance, one worker operated the heel cutting machine, another operated a sole cutting machine, another made shoelaces, still another assembled, labeled, and packaged these shoes. The assembly line, Henry Ford, was one person who foresaw the great potential in the assembly line. Ford created a moving assembly line to mass produce automobiles. In Ford plants, workers stood in one place all day, while the conveyor belts brought the work to them. After each worker did one or two tasks, the belt moved the product to the next worker's station. These techniques of mass production enabled workers to produce more goods per day at a lower cost. As prices dropped, more Americans could afford to buy manufactured goods. More customers meant more factories. By 1900, almost 4 times as many Americans were working in factories as a generation earlier. Air transportation. While Henry Ford was turning out cars on the assembly line, brothers Orville and Wilbur Wright were experimenting with flying. In 1903, with his brother Wilbur running alongside, Orville successfully piloted the first flying machine in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Although flight was only 12 seconds in duration, it sparked worldwide interest in flying. By the 1920s, an industry based on air travel had emerged. The U.S. Postal Service used planes to transport mail across the country, while the military used the planes for exploration and scouting. At the same time, wealthy Americans took their first commercial flights across the country.